Did you read Jack Miles?
I love Jack Miles.
His biography of God.
Yeah.
Won the Pulitzer Prize, and he says in there, this God is a God of radical unpredictability and terrifying moral ambivalence, the God of the Old Testament.
That's right. Well, what everybody, of course, has been fascinated with forever is the book of Job. Why did God behave that way? His answer, in a few words, is, I'm God and you're not. Yeah. But another interesting question to me is, why didn't Jesus write down the book of Jesus? Why didn't Jesus write down the equivalent of the Ten Commandments? Why didn't Jesus write a book? Here's the Jesus figure contained in a book, but Jesus himself doesn't write. How come?
Yes, go ahead.
I think because once you write something down, it becomes a permanent fixture, and it becomes dogma. Which is, in fact, what has happened with a lot of things that have been written down.
What's the difference between dogma and a story?
I think that the story, if you want to call it that, or let's call it the oral tradition, they have to be transmitted by one person to another person or group of people. So it is the breath, which is the spirit moving from one person to another. And as we know in the oral tradition, every time the spirit moves, it takes a different shape. Myths, for instance, in the oral tradition exist in different forms in different places. So possibly he wanted to keep his spirit, the spirit of what he was saying, possibly he wanted to keep it fluid rather than causing it to be fixed and permanent and therefore unchanging.
But before that, we have God writing down the Ten Commandments for Moses.
Yes,
that's quite
exactly.
a change.
Well, that is the usual contrast that is made between the letter and the spirit, the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, but it is not a contrast that you can see being acted out in a lot of religious groups. They much prefer the letter.
I heard you once say that human nature hasn't changed in thousands of years.
Yes.
How do we know?
Because we've read the myths. And the myths lay out pretty clearly what's on the human smorgasbord. What we want, what we fear, what we would like to have, what we would very much not like to have. Heaven and hell, for instance. Heaven, what we want. Hell, what we very much don't want. Okay? So we've always wanted to fly. In the myths, the gods fly. We don't. We've now arranged it so that we can fly, not quite in the same way. But everything that we do and every piece of technology we make is an extension of either a fear or a desire, and those human fears and human desires really have not changed. And they're reflected in the myths that have been with us for a long time.
Are they true?
What is true? True means more than one thing. True means prove it. You know, it has to be proven. It can mean that. And in a very materialistic society, that's all it means, which is why people keep searching for the remains of Noah's Ark. You know that it's not going to be true unless you can find the actual piece of wood. Okay, that's one kind of true. Another kind of true is it true about human nature? Is it true about who we are? Is it true about how we behave? People are of divided opinion about why myths continue and why they're important and what they are. Some people say they're maps of prehistory. Some people say they're maps of the human mind and psyche. And some people say that they're language dependent
What do you mean
events.
by that?
It's one of the characteristics of human beings that they have very elaborate languages. And these languages all have grammars. And the grammars all contain past tenses and future tenses. Now, dogs have languages too, but we don't think that any dog has ever said to any other dog, "Where did dogs come from?" You know, what is the origin of dogs? And what about before that? What about before there were any dogs? But because we have the kinds of languages we do, we go back in time as far as we can get in our imaginations. We want a beginning of the story, and we go as far ahead in the future as we can. We want an end to the story. And that's not going to be just us getting born and us dying. We want to be able to place ourselves within a larger story. Here's where we came from, here's where we're going, in some version or another. And when you die, this is what happens. And some of those stories are happier than other of those stories, but there's always more. There's always and then what happens? And then. Once we have that kind of language, we're going to have to postulate either a God entity or an unknown. Even, for instance, physicists will say, okay, instead of let there be light, there was the Big Bang, which must have been actually quite brilliant visually. And then you say to them, but what about before that? What happened before that? And they will say, well, there was a singularity. And you'll say...
A singularity?
Yes. You'll say, what is a singularity? And they will say, we don't know. So at some point in the story, there's going to be, we don't know. Okay, so think of it as a stage like this, and in the wings there is, we don't know. Let me put it another way. This book came out called The Life of Pi, a guy called Jan Martel, and it begins by saying, I'm going to tell you a story that's going to make you believe in God. Then he goes off on this completely seaman's yarn about getting lost in a lifeboat with the tiger and so on and so forth, and many strange and wonderful things happen to him until he pitches up on the shore of South America, whereupon, according to him, the tiger jumps off the boat and runs off into the woods. And he's found starving on the shore, and he's put in the hospital. And then these 3 Japanese insurance inspectors turn up to find out what happened to the boat that blew up at the beginning of the story. And he tells them this whole story. And they conferred among themselves, and they say, we think that maybe your story isn't true, and that there was no tiger. And the guy says, well, that may be so, but tell me this. Which story do you like better? The story with the tiger or the story without the tiger? And the other men confer amongst themselves, and they say, well, actually, we like the story with the tiger better. And our narrator starts to cry, and he says, thank you. So we like the story with the tiger better. We like the story with God in it better than we like the story without God in it, because it's more like us. It's more understandable. It's more human.
More human with God.
More human with God.
How so?
More human with God because the story without God is about atoms. It's not about somebody we can talk with in theory or that has any interest in us. So that the universe without an intelligence in it has got nothing to say to us. Whereas the universe with an intelligence in it has got something to say to us because it's a mirror of who we are. How about that?
Does a strict agnostic believe that we have a soul?
A strict agnostic could believe that, but could not state it as a matter of knowledge.
What do you think we mean by the word?
The soul?
Yes.
It's another one of these things that we know what we mean. We know what we mean, or we think we believe we know what we mean, but it's not something you can measure or prove. So it has to exist in the belief system. I prefer to believe that we have a soul because I like the story with the tiger better than the story without the tiger, and I like the story with the soul better than the story without the soul. It's a better story.
Margaret Atwood, thank you very much.
And thank you.